Hey guys, CWHolo1 here. Welcome back to another video, and today we're in a bit of a change of scenery here. We're in my room, and yes, I know the floor's a bit of a mess, but this is where I do my Lego stuff. And as you can see here, we have a model of a Pennsylvania Railroad coast-to-coast tender. Now, the real Pennsylvania Railroad coast-to-coast tenders were anywhere between 51 feet and 54 feet long. This model is a 42 stud long, an 8 stud wide model, and it's quite heavy. I built it so that there's a big brick of Legos right above the front wheels and the back wheels, because this is motorized, and it adds a lot of weight, which is very characteristic of the coast-to-coast tenders, because in reality, these things, when fully loaded, would oftentimes weigh more than the locomotive, including the massive M1As that they were put behind, which is the engine that I'm going to be building for this tender. Now, all that extra weight leads to a lot of pulling power. I have not tested to see how many cars this thing can pull, but towards the end of the video I will be throwing on as many freight cars that I can, and passenger cars if it can pull it, and seeing how many laps it can make, if it can make any at all. And I also have to factor in that I will be building a scale model of a Pennsylvania Railroad M1A mountain-type locomotive to put in front of this that this thing will have to push. And it will have to push it until I figure out how to put a motor inside that engine. Now, there are a couple details I think are worth pointing out on this tender. The first of which being that the receiver is up here, when it originally was in the front. And the reason it was originally in the front was because I wanted to keep it out of sight, but then I realized keeping it out of sight visually also puts it out of sight of the remote, thus it becomes a pain in the neck to make it respond to any commands, especially when there's something in front of it, and even when there isn't, it becomes a pain in the neck. So I made it come through the top of the coal. Now, another detail, and probably the most annoying of all the ones on here, comes with the motorized trucks underneath the tender. Now, typically LEGO makes these trucks with 2 axles, and the coast-to-coast tenders have 3. So I had to make it look like it has 3 axles. So to do that, I had to make it so that these things clip into the little holes on the side. So I had to do this, and ignore that. This became a problem because they come off all the time when it's going around corners and going over switches. So if I'm filming this running a bit later and you see one of these things fall off, don't be surprised. Now, another detail, which you might have seen in the last shot, is underneath there is a water scoop, and that is about the only detail, in fact it is the only detail underneath the tender. Until I find the time to put more details in there and figure out how to put them in, it will just remain that water scoop. Moving towards the back, we have another one of those motorized trucks that becomes a pain in the neck to put those clippy things on to make it look like it's got 3 axles. And on the very back, we have a ladder going up. We have, well, what's supposed to be a coupler cut bar. Of course, it needs a lot of work. I need to figure out how to get these things off. And we have these little marker light things, which need to be moved up a plate. Until I find the time to do that, they're going to be like that. So we're at the front now, and as you can see, we have the little receiving port for the what's supposed to be the drawbar coming off the locomotive, and I decided to use that instead of a regular coupler because it's a more permanent connection. It's a bit stronger. Also on the front, we have these little ladder things that I broke off a bit earlier, and inside there's a little ramp, and I built that to cover up the receiver, so you didn't have this big orange switch. When you looked in the front, if you will be able to see that, when I have the locomotive hooked up. And I have these little 2 pieces of coal, which probably shouldn't be there because there's no coal on the inside, so they're just kind of there when they're not supposed to be. Now, because the other side of the tender is exactly the same as the side that you're looking at now, we're going to move up to the top. In our coal load, you see we have the receiver, and we also have a whole ton of these 1x1 studs all over the place to simulate a coal load. We have this thing back here, which I'm assuming is a ramp, so that when the engine's moving, all the coal doesn't fly off the back, but I don't have a darn clue what that is. So if you know what that is, please tell me. Then we have this red deck. Now, typically when I see people making a Pennsylvania Railroad tender, or even the locomotive. To simulate the Tuscan red, they typically use brown, and I didn't really like that. So I decided to make it red, and then we have this doghouse in the back. And now, you'll see what this does in a minute when I go to turn it on and run it around. Alright, so as you can see now, the freight cars have come out, which means it's about time to get this thing running. Now, most of these are scratch-built. In fact, all of these are scratch-built except for that boxcar. And I have 2 of the Maersk container cars, but I'm not putting them on right now because they won't fit in the siding. But that's supposed to be a cattle car. That's supposed to be a gondola. That's a caboose that I took from one of the original My Creations, I believe. That's a flat car with logs. And that's a crane car that actually does work. And it's a little rough, so I don't use it a lot. Alright, so let's turn this thing on. Now to do this, it's a bit of a pain in the neck, because this thing is really stiff and annoying. There we go. So in here, we have the battery. Now you have the little green button that turns it on, and you have the charging port, and the charger fits perfectly in this. And when I originally set that up, I did not expect it to do that, so it was a very pleasant surprise. So let's turn this thing on. And the little green light's on. You can close it up. We are ready to run. Alright, so let's give this thing a couple laps without any of the freight cars, just to make sure that those triple axle clippy things stay on. And it does buzz a little bit because there's the plus-shaped axles that have to fit onto the square parts of the clips. So they bounce up and down a lot, and it causes it to make quite a racket. There's also quite a bit of hangover as well whenever it goes over the curves, because the thing is really quite big. Alright, so it's freight car time, and hopefully those clips stay on. Alright, so it's strength test time, so I've got 9 freight cars hooked up, and we're going to see if this thing can pull it. And if it can pull it at notch 1, I'm assuming it's going to have a pretty easy time. So, if you know the Pennsylvania Railroad mountain type story, like I do, you know that the locomotive was originally built to replace double-headed K4s over the Appalachian Mountains, specifically in the Pittsburgh division around Horseshoe Curve. So, I've taken the tender and I've hooked it up to 4 passenger cars that I custom built along with my brother. And the observation car does actually have a light, but I don't have it plugged in right now. So we're going to see if this guy can pull these 4 cars, because they are slightly heavier. And it does so easily. more passenger cars. Needs notch 2 this time. But it still gets going. Alright, so now I've had to mix in some of the freight cars. I put in the 3 longest that I have, and see if it does it this time. It still needs notch 2, but it gets going. It just needs to be in reception of the remote. Alright, so I've thrown on all the cars except the caboose because I can't fit it on. And see if it can pull every single one that I have. Notch 2 and it's moving. See if the couplers hold. It tends to have a problem of decoupling. So there we have it, a Lego Pennsylvania Railroad coast-to-coast tender that is 42 studs long, which is by far the biggest thing I've ever built. It is 3/4 the length of my Emerald Knight, which has a lengthened tender. And when I say the Emerald Knight, I mean the engine and the tender combined. So this thing is pretty big, and it was a lot of fun to build. And as you can see, it pulled every single freight car I had, with the exception of the caboose, because it wouldn't fit, but the caboose weighs almost nothing, so I'm sure I would have been able to pull it. And something I didn't film is that I took the Horizon Express engine and the SD40 Maersk and put them in front of the tender, and it did get moving, but it wasn't really consistent. The second it hit a turn, it stopped. So that was pretty much where it maxed out. But if you're wondering about the Pennsylvania lettering, they are vinyl decals that were made by my engineering teacher at school, and I can't thank him enough for doing that. They look fantastic. And they're on both sides, as you could see when it was going around the track on that side. So, they were a lot of fun to put on, too, and really easy. But anyway, I'm CW Holo 1, and have a good day, or maybe good night in your case. See ya.